happening, guys? This is It's All Blakademik. I'm your host, Jordan Jarrett-Bryan, and thank you very much for watching another one of our shows. Just before we get into this week's discussion, a reminder and a signposting. If you haven't already signed up to our free membership on our website, blacademic.com. Plenty of content, previous shows, articles, podcasts, all that niceness and goodness is on there. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, follow us and subscribe on our YouTube channel here as well. Okay. So this week on the show, we have a discussion about women's football and the lack of representation of black women in particular within the women's game. I think it's something that has slowly been an issue creeping up on many people's consciousness. And they look at the men's game and there's big issues of representation across that particular part of football. I think it's 10 times worse in the women's game. So I've got 4 ladies that work in football and sports to have this discussion with me here today. I'm joined by sports broadcaster Anne-Marie Batson. Hello, Anne-Marie.
Hello, Jordan.
Thanks for coming on. I've also got here Anita Abayomi here as a host of the all-female football podcast, Gold Diggers. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. I've also got on my far right here, Michelle Moore, development consultant specialising in women's sports. How are you?
Good.
Oh, you're a regular now. You're like your season regular.
Love it.
And finally, I'm joined for the first time on the show here, Felicia Pennant, who edits the fanzine platform Season Zine. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Ladies, cheers for joining me on the show this week. Let me kick off by, I'll throw it out there, whoever wants to jump in first, jump in. What is it like being a black woman working in women's football? We'll get to the lack of representation and the reasons why that is and why that matters. But first of all, just talk to me through what it's like working in this particular space. Who wants to go first? Anita, you go first.
I was going to go first. It was all right. It's daunting. For me personally, I work more with men's football and then going into women's football as well. It's just a bit daunting because you said we're going to go into representation later, but I can't talk about my experience. Like there's just no representation, and then it's just like I feel like I'm a sore thumb out of like a bunch of people, you know. Like I feel like I stick out like a sore thumb, and I don't know, it's kind of depressing for me at the moment, but I feel like I got a bit too deep, a bit too early.
Not at all. So just to stick with you do, as far as I'm aware, the only all-female football podcast. Yeah. Why did you decide to set up your podcast, and was it conscious to make it all-female?
Yeah, literally. It's not just all female, it's only for ethnic minorities as well. Like, I don't want to exclude anyone, but it's only for ethnic minorities. And that's because there's a lack of us in the industry. And if I can do whatever I can to get more women into football, more women into women's football, into men's football, if I can do it by creating this platform where they feel safe or where they can just come and, learn more about football, learn more about the game, I want to be the person to do it, Like, I'm happy to put all my finances into it so I can see more representation in a women's game, like in 20 years' time. If I have a little bit to do with it, I'm going to be happy with myself in 20 years. So that's why I created Gold Diggers.
I think you need to drill down it a bit further about what area of women's football people work in. So, for example, with the broadcast section, I think it's moved a lot further forward than than a lot of people think. The written side of it, though, there's a distinct lack of representation. In terms of podcasting, I would say there is still a distinct lack of representation. So I think, and then the online side I can't really speak of because I don't work in that space. Maybe that's something that Felicia can talk about. But I think definitely the broadcast where I predominantly work, you've seen a lot more faces now, and you're slightly conscious. I've been slightly conscious of coming into it a little bit later than some other people. And I think I've had to build some credibility and build relationships around that because there's people that have been working in women's football far longer than what I have. And I'm very conscious I don't want to tread on their toes, but I also want to add my views and thoughts and opinions within the game and be part of that collective as well. So when I came into it, I was very conscious of my colour. That was the first thing. The second thing is being conscious that there are women who've been working it far longer than me, but have built relationships with those women because they've been a source of knowledge and information for me, and I've built friendships around that as well. So I think that's great, but we're all very conscious, particularly on the written side of things, that's, that is still in the dark ages as far as I'm concerned.
See it though, when people are talking about like flare-ups, and unfortunately I just feel like I get your point about people being really experienced and like obviously having that knowledge, but I just feel like there's a distinct lack of knowing when to pass the mic. Like when, yes, you as the more experienced person can frame the article, frame the topic, but knowing, I think that's what I think is a big problem about it at the moment in maybe the more written side, or even some of the I guess organisations that are kind of trying to bring people up. It still sometimes just feels like you're talking about black women, but there are no black women, like there's no black women actually speaking. It's a white person speaking about black women, and there are black women that you can find and speak to about it. I mean, going back to Anita's point about creating a space for black women in football, I mean that's a big part of why I started Season, and I started that in 2016 when I was 24, and now there is that sense of, gosh, I'm not old by any means, but it does feel like, you know, a new generation is coming in, and like people like Anne-Marie that you see, and you can see like more women kind of trying to get their points across and getting those opportunities a bit more now, I guess, over the past year, because it's been kind of forced onto people to do. I don't know that everyone's doing it of their own free will. But it's still, I guess, a bit of a minefield navigating through. And I guess I just think the biggest thing is like all of us have, I think for the most part, tried to do things of our own steam. And then when you start doing it off your own steam, then people suddenly realize, oh, actually, there is a black woman that can speak about it. And let's bring you into the fold. Let's get you on BBC. Let's get you on TalkSport, where it just sometimes seems like there are white women that can leave uni and walk into a trainee role or a role like that and kind of come through the establishment that way. It just seems like we have to prove ourselves independently first, and struggle in that way. I mean, yes, and completely being independent obviously means you have the freedom to do that, and you can choose who you work with and what you want to promote, but there's also, you know, the stress that comes with that, the financial burden that comes with that. But I think that a lot of black women that you see in football that are visible have all put in all of those resources, all of that time, all of that energy, and it's not always easy.
So Michelle, let me just ask you, I know that you work across various sports, football being one of them. Just want to get your personal account of what it is like working in football, in particular as a black woman who also works across other sports. And this is our national game. It's our biggest sport by a mile. What is your perspective of working in this industry, especially in comparison to maybe other industries? Is it better or worse? And does that matter?
I think it's actually worse because women's sport is just such a white space across the piece. So, you know, on the field of play, right through to the administration and the senior governance and the leadership of women's football. So, as somebody who kind of works as if you like, as a consultant and also as a leadership coach to people working in the industry, what I find is when I go to events or any kind of awards evening, it's a very white space. And I remember having really kind of challenging questions with some of the leaders of these, the organisers of some events. And I said, you know, there are black and mixed women who could be a part of this event, who can actually be invited. And they said, oh, we invited such and such, we invited such and such. So it's the same black and mixed women each time. And it was just such a small thing, but it was such a mighty thing, because actually that's how women's sport works. It's the whiteness that is a part of it. They don't even realise that they're excluding. And if you're not a part of that group, then actually you're not a part of the dialogue in any kind of meaningful way. And so when you say comparing it to other sports, my experience is that football is just kind of, it makes up its own rules. So the other kind of sports that I work within, you have like the Sports Governance Code, for example, that Sport England and UK Sport brought out a few years ago, which actually made the national governing bodies of sport increase the representation in terms of gender. They identified gender as the diversity target to improve gender diversity by 30% on sports governing boards. They didn't include race within that. They didn't include disability. They didn't have any other understanding of you know, the intersections of any of those identities, but they singled out gender. And what that did is that then held those governing bodies to account to that statistic. But football somehow was just almost could exist outside of that. So what came out as an outcome of that is that target benefited white women. didn't benefit black women. You had Heather Rabatz, who's the first woman of colour to be on the FA board as a director. She came out in the Daily Telegraph and said quite clearly, this benefits white women, this does not benefit black women. And when you have organisations that are in receipt of the public purse, actually ethnic diversity and race needs to be a key part of their targets. So, for me, football kind of stands outside of what other sports are doing and how they're being held to account.
So I want to get to representation off the pitch in just a moment. But if we start on the pitch, because a lot of the research that I was doing was looking at on the pitch. So I started looking at the men's England team as an example. It was bare black man in the England team. Rashford, Sterling, Sancho, Reece James. There's half the squad are either black or mixed race.
Yeah.
I then look at the women's England team, and I've just got a couple of names here, regulars, Paris and Stokes, so the only two regular players in the team. And in the last squad, I think even Stokes wasn't even in that squad. What's going wrong there? So I want you guys to educate me and our viewers. Is there a case of, I'm saying this because I think I just have to ask a question, less black girls are playing football? Is it an access problem? Are they just not good enough? Are the white girls better? What is the reason why on the pitch we're seeing significantly less black women than white women? And even across the top teams, I did a count. At WSL, I got Stokes, Spence, Asante, James, Spencer, Drew Spence play for England, who now playing for Jamaica, interestingly enough. There's only a couple of handfuls of black women playing for the top teams in the Women's Super League. Why is that?
I think it's quite complex. I'm just appalling at sport, so you'd never actually catch me like playing football. But the main thing when I think of like on the pitch, the main thing that comes to mind, like as a black woman, is just what happened to Anita Aluko. And I think that was, that's a couple of years ago now. But the fact that she, the manager was racist to her, and the outcome of that, and how her teammates didn't back her, including the other women of colour there, just showed you. I mean, I guess it's something that you see in reality TV every year. Like, as a black woman, you're going to be portrayed in a certain way and you won't be backed by anyone kind of around you. And it just felt a bit like that, like when, she was in court stating her case and just watching that outcome. And, for me, watching that, I'm like, well, if I was inclined to play football after seeing that, why on earth would I ever put myself in that position, knowing that if something like that did happen, and we know, regardless of any reports, that there is racism in Britain, I'm not going to get the support that I need. My feelings might be dismissed, and I actually might be gaslighted. So why would I put myself in that position? Now, that is from my standpoint and what I do. I can't speak for like people that are thinking, oh, maybe I want to go professional. But for me, like that being in any space, I mean, it makes me more cautious and more careful even now when you're navigating things, and like when you're looking at the England team, because they didn't back her and they were named and shamed in a book and still haven't, apologised. So
what are the rationales that you think as to why there are significantly less black women playing in the top end of women's football?
I think she's right. It's very complicated because and I think again it's drilling down into the different areas. So definitely the Anita Aluko situation I think has played a massive part. I think the reduction in the national talent regional centres, which used to draw a lot of the regional talent in from the community, they got cut right back, and there are various reasons which I don't entirely buy why that happened. So I think that's another reason. I also think...
So sorry, for the people that don't follow women's football, explain why that would diminish.
So there was up until about maybe 10, maybe 15 years ago, there were national talent centres around the country, around about 50 of them, some of them quite based in London and around the rest of England and the UK. And then they got cut down to 30. Now, from what I understand, it's because there wasn't enough coming through the door to justify having this number of 50 or 52 centres. So they cut them back to about 30 at a time when, let's be honest, women's football wasn't really on a lot of people's radar. It would have been around the time of the Hope Powells of this world and the Rachel Yankees of this world. Over the last 5 to 10 years, things have started to progress more. There's been a lot more eyes on it, except that the regional talent centres got cut down to around about 25 to 30, and a lot of them went out to rural areas. And if you take that accessibility away, particularly from low-income families who live within inner-city areas of, I don't like the word, but I will use it, urban areas, you're cutting away opportunity straight away. And therefore, the scouting system that was in place has been removed. That avenue of opportunity has been removed. So that means there's not so much scouting anymore. So that is definitely a reason, I think, that there hasn't been many young girls coming through the door. I think another reason is the WSL itself, as you rightly pointed out. You know, you've got Lauren James, who's doing brilliantly at Manchester United Women. She's identified as a potential lioness, but that means that's still not enough going through the door. So you have to look at the teams within the WSL and the Championship as well, and the national leagues. From a personal perspective, I know when I turned 13, 14, boys came into the picture for me and sport went out the window. Right? So I blame you men, basically, for my path in life.
Only took 7 minutes for us to get to
I was doing the man bashing.
Wow.
So
Go for it, Emma.
But the fact is, it did. It kind of, and now I was foolish, I was young. What did I know at that time? But, you know, if you think about young teenage girls now, they've got a lot more things going on in their lives than I did a few years ago. Social media and friendships and things like that. Sport potentially could be the last thing on their minds. And also, you look at the school, in terms of taking part in sport, we know that there are...
So why does that differ? Explain why it differs for white girls then.
I think it's... I don't think it necessarily is different.
There's just less girls generally.
Just less girls generally, which breaks my heart because sport is such a fantastic thing. Okay. And I think what also feeds into that is the selling off of school playing fields as well, the lack of facilities in the local areas that have been sold off thanks to this Tory government, sorry, I'm going to say it, and various other governments. They've sold off school pitches for housing development. And I'm all for somebody needing, you know, we need more houses in there, but I don't think you should cut off one to save something else. And I think the lack of facilities as well within areas within England, I think has also played a massive part. And there's not really a decent scouting system, I would say, within the women's game as well.
And also, I went to an all-girls school and we were literally pushed into doing rounders, we were pushed into doing tennis. Like, when I used to speak about football in my secondary school, it was more like, okay, you guys go play in the gym if you want. How the hell am I supposed to play football in a gym? It didn't make any sense. So it was never actually pushed towards, you know, playing football. It was more like rounders, tennis, badminton, that type of thing. And when I used to go to one of these sporting centres. I used to go to the David Beckham Academy. Where the hell's that gone?
Yeah, I remember that.
Where is that gone? I used to get like I got my medals from David Beckham Academy. They were like, you're gonna be a superstar. I'm so sure of it. And I was gassed. Like I was like, yeah, I'm gonna be the first female footballer. You know what I mean? And I was young. Like, I was 11. I was believing in this dream. I get to secondary school, like you said. Boys do come into the picture, but if the school's not promoting sports as per se, and it's just saying stick to rounders or stick to badminton, then you don't really have a choice, you know?
I agree with you. My school, I said I wasn't good at sports, but I did stick me in goal because I was tall, and we did play like girls football. And I mean, I'm not that ball. Now that it's being proven how heavy the balls are and how they can affect your health. I mean, I ducked anyway, but now there's more reason to duck. But I would say we would definitely, in the sports that we could do, you could do football. I mean, when you were a bit older, but it was mainly hockey, netball. I did go to a boarding school, by the way, let me just prefix that. And we had the field, there were the facilities to do it, but football was mainly a boys' thing. I'm not sure if it's the same now, because it's been a little while since I was there, but I think there's that. I also think when it comes to black women, maybe it's a cultural thing as well, and maybe it's there's one thing playing and doing athletics and doing sport as for health and for mental health and for a recreational hobby thing. But then if it's a different conversation, like with your parents and your family who are saying, I want to do sport professionally. And so obviously there are clearly black women that have excelled in this space. And I think they've also had the support of their family. And sometimes there are other women that have obviously overcome the odds and obviously converted their families around. But I will say culturally, I mean, it definitely, I think the people around in your family, like if you've had sports people in your family, if you've, if your family value these moments, if your family are into football already, maybe that conversation is a little bit easier, or maybe you have different battles to fight. Like I think it's so personal. Married in with everything else that we've said, there are quite a lot of factors that come into the thinking.
It's a really good point there. That one of the bits of research that's come out that's not so widely known is that one of the most biggest impacts on a young girl's participation in sport is the mother's relationship to sport. And actually, if your mum is sporty, you're more likely to be sporty. But just kind of backing up what you're saying there, Felicia, it is to do with the social, cultural, religious and economic barriers that black women and black girls specifically face. So that affects their participation level in sport per se. So that means that black girls are twice as likely to drop out as white girls, and black girls are overrepresented in basketball, in dance, and in track and field athletics, and underrepresented in all other sports. So when you start to unpick it, it's to do with the structural inequalities that also exist. So if you're black and Asian, a young person, you're more likely to live in an inner city area, you're more likely to live in a deprived postcode, and therefore the structural inequalities that go with that affect your access and opportunity to sport and physical activity. So when you overlay all of that together, it's not any kind of mystery as to why there isn't that kind of pathway from grassroots that filters up into the national squad. So we know that exactly what you were saying, Anne-Marie, about this drive to professionalise the women's game, this acceleration that all of the administrators did and all the leaders within women's football decided to do, meant that it came at a cost of inclusion. So let's now just close all of the 52 talent centres out there, where a lot of our black young women were at that level, and then let's make it down, take it down to 30. And so that young woman that lives in South London now has to get herself to Staffordshire. She's never going to go. If you start to really unpick it, the economic barriers are so significant. And when you think about our opportunities and our access, those are the serious fault lines within women's football.
To that point, I didn't realise actually that all the London clubs aren't in London in the women's game. They're all outside of London. So Arsenal, Chelsea, Tottenham is in Barnet. Yeah.
It's a long way.
King's Meadow is far.
These places are far. I'm not going there.
It's hard to get to.
Touching on the parent aspects and the family things and stuff. So from my own personal experience, right, my mum and dad didn't want me to get into football at all. No matter how good I was at football, they said nah. But when I spoke about tennis, they were like, yeah, you can do tennis, but that's because Serena Williams is in the game. That's because there's representation in that game.
So there was someone that people could look to and be like, oh, that black woman did it. So go on then, you can give it a go.
She's successful and economically successful. I do think it's about at least from my experience, your just parents don't want you to struggle they did, and for them, if it's a sport that provides you that security, but the status and the money, but you're being rewarded for your hard work and the sacrifices that you're making.
But is it also more the fact that, sorry to cut you, I'll let you finish, but is it not, even pre-Serena Williams, the women's, tennis is probably the only game I can think of where the women's and the men's game has always been pretty kind of on some kind of a par in the way that other sports aren't. So even without Serena Williams, would your parents have been quite comfortable you going into tennis because they're seeing the women's game
That's the
thrive?
problem. The problem is, if Serena Williams wasn't there, my parents would not have looked twice at tennis. No matter how
it was purely
equal, no matter how equal the game is never equal for a black woman. It's never equal for a black woman. You've got to work that 10 times harder. And until there's proof in my African household, until there's proof that someone can be successful in that environment, it ain't gonna happen. That's not happening. So now, my little cousins, my little siblings, my mum and dad are like, you can be like Emmanuel Aluko. I'm looking at them like, I could have been like her.
It's to have that name or that person that they can say hey, I can see how you can be successful. I can see that you can reach that level. I think this is what we're talking about, representation. I do think there's that, if you can be it, if you can see it, you can be it. for parents, maybe more than you actually do it, the person who's actually doing it.
So, some of you mentioned Annie's name a few times now. Do we see Annie as that significant figure for black girls on a par with Serena Williams in terms of being, oh, well, Annie did it, she's black, she's female, she's dark skinned. Is she, some of you guys know her as well. Do you think she realizes how big a role she played in showing other girls, other black girls, that you can be the thing as well?
I think she does. I think she has become this real inspirational agent for change. Annie has really taken on the FA and all of her critics and stood up in her truth and being uncompromising in that and saying this racism that I experienced, alongside Drew Spence and Leanne Sanderson is not acceptable. And in doing that, she really showed us that, you can take them on, and in some respects, you can have a win. But to this day, we haven't really seen the real reckoning of that, of what that's come at. Yeah, it comes at a big cost. Yeah. She never played for England again. The reality is there have been other high-profile situations, with what happened with Renee Hector as well. And when you start to look at this, the reason why she takes on such an inspirational kind of identity is because we share in those experiences of oppression. We can see what she's gone through so publicly. She was in the headlines for a year, and it was front page news. And so she represents something very significant to us as black women, and not many black women can do that. Not many black women would choose to do that if they were in that position. And you can't expect them to either as well. There's a real tension there with the responsibility that comes with being a role model in all kinds of ways. And so she has become this real inspirational agent for change in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, because she was the first female pundit at Match of the Day. I think that's huge. And the fact that she is dark-skinned, because I do think colorism also plays a role when we talk about representation in women's football. The players that you're mentioning in England are all mixed race, and there are no, Annie was that dark-skinned player for such a long time, but she was the record goal scorer in her time. And then when you see the last Women's World Cup, for me watching it, I was so why has she been erased from England's recent history? Why is she not spoken about the way that she should be? If it was any other, the way that Wayne Rooney or other, men's players are spoken about, if they've, if they've set records, why was she? It felt like she was erased, if I'm honest, with all and actually that England team did better than this England team, if we're honest. They got a bronze medal at a time when there was way less investment, way less sponsorship, way less visibility. So
when it comes to the money element, I'll bring you in, Anne-Marie, here. Is it a coincidence that as...
I have no money, by the way.
I'll come to you, Michelle. Is it a coincidence that as more money is being ploughed into the women's game, there's this mega Barclays deal, we're seeing less black women in it? Is that just a coincidence, or
goodness,
is there something to unpick there?
That's a really good question. It's a tough one to answer as well, because if I knew the answer, I'd be a very rich woman, to be honest. I don't know. I don't know if it's more money that you'd see.
Because I'm just seeing the last 6 months, ex-sponsor, record investment in the women's game, and that's all great. I think that's a really good thing. But I was doing my notes last night, thinking, hang on a minute, why is it that I'm seeing less Anita Alukos in the game, and there's people are getting paid more, clearly, in the women's game?
I was going to say, all right, so if there is more money coming to the game, what I'd like to see is more regional talent centres being rebuilt.
That's what I was going to say.
And that's it for me. I know that the FA has done a couple of things to try and encourage more black girls to get involved in the game, and Asian girls as well. I think they've set up some sort of programme linking in with the EFL Trust. So they will have local scouts on the ground that are within the EFL, the English Football League, that can identify potential candidates that you like that could go through the elite pathway to become a future Lioness or play in the WSL or the Championship. What bothers me, maybe I'm going off slightly tangent, is time. I think it takes too long sometimes for these things to get off the ground, and we don't have the luxury of time anymore, because if you think about it, the last World Cup, as Felicia's mentioned, you only had Demi Stokes and Nikita Paris. and probably those two in the previous World Cup when it was in Canada. Before that, you had Rachel Yankee, Alex Scott, Leanne Sanderson, Anita Aluko, Drew Spence, Danny Carter, and probably 2 or 3 more that have probably played within that team. It has been a gradual phasing out of it. So why is it only now that we've got eyes on it? Why was this not spotted 2, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago? And that's what I'd like an answer to.
So why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why is it important that we stop that phasing out and reverse it and we get more and more women in? Why is that important? That's to anyone that wants to jump in. Because I want to try and get across to our viewers. We've articulated the problem.
Yeah.
Why should, sounds a bit crass, but why should anybody care? Why is it important that we have more black women in women's football?
That lack of representation means that it just asphyxiates any kind of aspiration for black women, black girls to participate or to think that they can get to a level of being a sporting director at a football club. It means that if they don't see it, they actually don't believe that it's possible. And so it's integral because actually black women in across society are not in enough leadership positions, and sport can be a gift in all kinds of ways to hold up a lens to these inequalities, but also provide opportunities for black women to be in those spaces. And so I think we need to diversify all of the ways in which football is organised. And so that doesn't have to take a long time. It really doesn't, because what it needs is white people to give up or just share some of their power. But they're not interested in that. They're not interested in doing that. And so what happens is we have spaces where we take on a self-determinist attitude, don't we? We kind of look at the teachings of Marcus Garvey and we think, well, what can we do? We can set up our own collectives, seasons in, gold diggers, everything that goes with empowering ourselves to enable us to thrive within this oppressive environment.
So on that point, let me ask you, Anita and Felicia, how do you feel about having to set up your own thing? Do you feel a little bit of resentment that you've had to do this in order to kind of have your voice, be visible? Is there an element of, well, why did I have to put my own money and my own time into having a presence in this industry whereas other people haven't had to do that?
For me, because I actually did, when I did my NCTJ, I did do a sports journalism module. I actually did it with Jeanette Kwachi. That's how I met her. And I went and interned at Talk Sport, which I listen to every day. I really like it now that it's a lot more diverse and there's way more representation. But back in the day, just being in that environment, I was like, gosh, there's only one woman here, and I'm the only black person here. And I walked in, and that's how I felt. And don't get me wrong, this is almost 10 years ago now. But looking around, I just felt, God, I don't want to be in this environment because you're fighting every morning, everyone knows, as a black person, you're told that you have to work 10, 20, 50% harder. But then as a woman in a football space, which is a male space, it's just even more crushing. And I just felt that, obviously I engage with it. I'm obsessed with Chelsea and all of those things. But I also felt that, well, if I want to communicate how my opinion and also empower and platform other women of colour and other marginalised communities that aren't represented in this establishment, I felt like it was worth doing it, and I don't feel resentful about that. I felt that the idea was so that we could feel comfortable in that space also, because it's not always comfortable, and things like the football blacklist, going into that room, and I was like...
It's beautiful.
I was like, oh my God. And then you realise that it's because a lot of the time you're usually one-off, but when you put all of the one-offs together in one room, there's actually so many. And that was really eye-opening for me. So I just feel like having to do it by myself, it meant that I could do it on my own terms. It's definitely, difficult and not for everyone. And, the cracks are getting, a bit wider for people. I think people are trying to hire in a more representative way. It's taking time. That's the other thing. I think it's also time, is that you can see that steps are being taken. But I do feel like as a woman in this kind of environment, there is an age limit on you, unless you're an exception and you feel like, your 20s is sometimes where like, you know, this is where you kind of break in, and then, or like maybe your early 30s, and like if you are a bit, sometimes like with singing, if you're a bit older, you've kind of missed that cutoff, and like, yes, they want a black person, but it's a younger one. It wouldn't be you, even though you're experienced. So I do think that's also another thing in doing your own thing. It's like, well, I'm young, I'm hungry, I have the time, dedication, happy to put my own, you know, disposable wealth in it, because this is the right time and this is the right alignment. All the stars have aligned for me to do that, but it's not in the wide industry, but that shouldn't stop me from doing it. That's kind of how I saw it.
So same question to you. You know, how hard has it been trying to get a footprint in this industry off your own back, spending your own money, your own time, in a way that you might see other, you know, your white counterparts not having to have done the work that you're doing off your own back, but yet where you are, if not further ahead?
I don't know. I like to tell people that it's been difficult, and don't get me wrong, it has been difficult and it has been daunting, but at the same time, like, just listening to what Felicia just said now, and then I'm looking at Anne-Marie, and then I'm just thinking, representation's right here, you know, like there's actually loads of representation, and I'm missing out on the fact that there's that much representation. So when I made Gold Diggers 2 years ago, I was 22, and I was looking around like, there's not a lot of representation around me. But then the more I got into the industry, I started seeing like there's people out there that genuinely want to help you get into the industry. So there's black women, there's black men, and I always name drop this woman because she literally pushed me into the industry, and it's Jess Creighton. So I look at Jess Creighton and I look at her as, wow, like I want to be like you, you know, like I'm seeing you on my TV screen. You're the reason why my dad's letting me put the money in this, you know? My dad's seeing you on TV and saying, you can be like that.
You can talk to that camera and tell Jess personally.
You're the reason. You're the reason. Like, real talk, like, she's actually the reason. Like, my dad would look at her on Sky Sports and be like, wow, I want you to be in that position someday. And I'll look at my dad like, I don't think I can be a journalist, but I would like to be as important as she is.
To the industry,
yeah, I can contribute to the industry in that sense.
Very important.
It's really important to have that representation. And of course, like, making Gold Diggers off my own back, spending my own money. Listen, I made Gold Diggers when I came out of uni. I was broke. Like, I was broke as hell, paying for studio sessions, gathering girls around to like contribute, even though, you know, everyone's pocket is tight at the moment.
But you thought it was important.
But it was so important to do it. And there was not one day where I thought like, I need to stop doing this, like it's hurting my pocket. Like, that was never the issue. The issues would be like, oh, these girls are so catty, man, I don't want to do it no more with them. Like, that would be the issue, but it will never be something like, I can't afford to do this anymore, because I know that what I'm doing is contributing to representation in this industry that I love so much. So if I've got to sacrifice for my younger cousins to get through to the industry a lot smoother, calm. Exactly. So yeah, I'm quite proud of what I've done, if I'm being honest.
You should be. Just last couple. Well, first one, I often discuss, or I'm on panels or hosting issues, and Marie as well, around racism in football, and it's normally always men. So I've got 4 women here. We are a few weeks after the social media blackout that happened across most of football, and a few other sports took part in it as well. Just briefly, ladies, what were your views on that? Do you think it was something that was a step in the right direction, or did you think it was a lot of aesthetic and a lot of posturing, but it won't and hasn't dealt with the problem? Start with you, Anne-Marie.
It was never going to deal with the problem outright.
Facts.
Anybody
Can
who
it
thought
deal with the problem, or
it's one step forward in terms of highlighting the issue, but the issue of racism on social media goes a lot deeper. And I think what was heartening for me was seeing other sports getting involved in it, that it wasn't just football. You saw that tennis, rugby, cricket, they all got involved with the boycott, which I thought was quite heartening. I did the boycott because I wanted to support it, but I'm not naive to think that it was going to solve the whole issue entirely. What I would have liked to have seen is, well, I think the next step actually is getting sponsors involved. If you've got Adidas or Nike or somebody of that level to get involved in the boycott, going for the pocket, going for the cash, going for the bag, as they say, as the young people say nowadays. I think, hit them where it hurts, which is in the pocket, in the money, and I think that would have been a real statement, a proper heavy hitting statement?
Just briefly, I took part in the boycott by default because I didn't want to. So I don't believe in it. I really don't believe in it at all. I think we know what the solution is. We're just kind of baby stepping our way to the wasting time. But the reason why I did not tweet or post during the blackout was because even though I don't believe in it, I thought it would be quite churlish of me to actively, seemingly go against it. Yeah. And I thought, I don't believe in this at all, but I don't have to tweet for 4 days. It's not a big deal for me. So I kind of did it by default. You're in there, so you don't agree.
No, I'm in that. I was so torn about it, but I reading all the different statements that people put out, like, we know this isn't going to solve it, but we're standing in solidarity. And I was like, standing in solidarity with what? Like, for me personally, isn't that just, that's the line that is trotted out every single time something racist happens to something. We stand, the people that it didn't happen to, we're standing in solidarity, and it just felt a bit like, I felt like the whole thing was an empty gesture, to be honest. I felt like, I agree with you in the sense that it felt like almost like peer pressured, like even if you didn't agree with it, to be that one that was continuing, because we're in this kind of cancel culture, like, oh, people want to jump on you and
that was a concern for sure, but it was more, I just thought, as someone that works in this industry, if I tweet at a time when people naively believe this is a way in the right direction, it would look good on me. And I thought, I don't have to tweet for 4 days. It's not something I have to do.
But I felt like, I've spoke about this with different people, and it's like, well, as a black person, like it really, I feel like that the whole thing should have been like, what sits comfortable with you and your conscience. And for me, I just kind of felt like, you aren't attacking the root of the problem. It's like everyone who, like the people that know what they need to do to end racism, and it's not happening because it's about power. And we've already spoken about how people don't want to give up power. So the status quo won't change. But it felt like, oh, we suddenly got someone to unite and blame that isn't us. And it's like, you know what UEFA's doing, you know what FIFA's doing, you know what football clubs are doing, you know what, zero tolerance, there is tolerance. So it was like, it just felt like a chance for everyone to pass the buck and like not look at their shortcomings of that, right, we're going to attack, all these social media platforms. And also the fact is that, one reason I feel that why, this has increased over this time is because fans aren't in stadiums. There are, stats, I think, things that kick out and different surveys that show that, racism, like in stadiums, has gone up. And then it's like, when you take fans out of racism, because that rooted mindset is still there, but people have found another way to express it, and it's there. So I don't feel like it was tackling the actual problem. And like, also the other big thing was like, I think it would have been way more powerful if you just said, like Terry originally, it was like indefinitely, not give it a clear time frame.
Totally agree. Where
it's like, you're fine to, like, yes, it's hurt your money in a small way, but actually all of you big, football clubs can afford to lose 4 days. Really, it should have been like, right, we're starting from here. Even to the end of the season, it's not that long, but that would make a much bigger statement than 4 days. You've given your social media their bank holiday weekend. Like, to me, it just felt like half-hearted. And then on the flip side, when you talk, my dad is like a great voice of reason. He was like, yes, but, that we had this whole conversation. Is any change good change? I was like, well, I don't know. I think that's a really interesting point, because to me, it showed that there wasn't any real deep thought that had gone into it, right? So if they were to do something that had some proper serious coalition that we could see that was rooted in tackling and being anti-racist, right? That wasn't just a knee-jerk, because it kind of, and I understand that position in terms of that this is something going along the lines of anti-racism, but really it feels very performative. Yes.
And I actually identify with you, Jordan, because I didn't do any social media, although I didn't say that I was a part of it. I just consciously didn't engage with my social media platforms over that time. So I think this is about the lack of diversity at a senior and a board level, within the brands, within the organisations making the decisions about, right, we're going to do a social media boycott. If we had greater representation, greater ethnic diversity around the table, the conversation would be different. People would be challenging it and saying, why? For what purpose? So I think there's something there around the lack of real thought leadership that goes in with trying to kind of solve some of these problems. And I think some of the solutions lie in coalition. They don't really lie in allyship, which is what I see this as. They lie in people coming together externally to sport, academic institutions, charities who have expertise in this industry, like the Runnymede Trust, who's the UK's leading race equality think tank, and then putting all of that thought leadership together and coming up with robust ways to tackle these issues.
Can I come back on something though? Does that mean then that because I actually supported it, does that make me wrong in my thinking in that? Because that's the thing I'm slightly conscious of, because I've got a slightly different viewpoint from Felicia and from the rest of you guys. I'm sitting here thinking, goodness me, should I have not done this now? But that's what it is. It's that pressure. It's the pressure. It's the pressure you felt of not tweeting it. I took part in it because I do believe in my heart it is a step forward, even though I acknowledge it's not going to solve it, because it's not. So I sit here thinking, actually, was I right to take part in it?
I was conscious, and maybe wrongly so, of the optics, because I've got I've got 8,000 small compared to other people following. If at a time when everyone is trying to come up with a solution, Jarrett-Bryan, the black sports broadcaster, is going against it, that doesn't look good. Do you know what I mean? Even though I don't believe in it, it would look churlish, as what I use. So I just thought, if there was something I had to tweet that was really important, I would have tweeted. But there was nothing that was so important that I thought, this can't wait till Tuesday. So I just thought,
I think it's your conscience. I felt like that was it's like what you felt comfortable about in your conscience to do. And like, if you would, if someone wanted to challenge you about it, you would feel comfortable doing it. So I completely, like you said, I think that everyone's standing in a slightly different place. So from my perspective, I just kind of felt like,
I'm just not in the long thing. You're not wrong for what you think. I'm just not in the long thing, and I think for me, the answer's there.
Yes.
Why are we tiptoeing to the answer? Just walk to the answer.
But let's reframe this a little bit, because we're talking about black women, and this is what happens. Like, black women's experience of racism is very, very different.
Well, I wanted to come next to you,
glad.
Because I know that you tweeted recently a screenshot of something that you got some racist abuse on. Was it Instagram or Twitter? Instagram. And you posted it on Twitter.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to go into kind of things that you got tweeted or messages. I'm sure we can all work that out. How regular is that, and what do you think you gain by letting everybody else know what abuse you get?
So, just for context, like, I got the abuse during this blackout.
The irony, right?
Or whatever, the irony, right? And then it's just the most disgusting hate speech that I'd actually ever received. Like, I get a lot of racist abuse. Like, I get the usual, you monkey, you're this, you're black that. But this was like talking, I'm sorry to be so graphic, but this was like talking about raping me and like, like sending me back to my country, calling me a disgusting monkey, things like that. Like, and then I was just like, you're doing this whilst the whole blackout's happening. You know the blackout's happening because I'm tweeting about the blackout and I'm saying that I'm doing the blackout. So like, I'm doing the blackout and you want to come and discourage me. So that's when I said, all right, cool, I'm not doing this no more. And it was on the Saturday that I tweeted it out. I'm like, listen, you lot are doing this blackout. All right, what's next? Instagram, over to you. I reported on Instagram how many times? Nothing was done until Jeanette messaged Instagram for me, and then they emailed me saying, oh, we've seen your post, after they've taken my post down on Instagram, because I brought light to it on Instagram. They took it down instantly. They said, oh, we've seen your post, oh, sorry for taking it down, we're going to put it back up for you. Have you reported this situation? I said, I've reported it like 4 times, I'm sure I've reported it. Then they were like, oh, we haven't seen this report in Instagram, can you report it again? How many times do I need to report it for you guys to see that I am being racially attacked? Well, how many times is it going to take? And that's why I gaslighted it on Twitter. I'm happy you got so much recognition on Twitter, because I'm thinking, you lot are doing this blackout, but people like me, like I live on social media. Like I'm the social media generation. My content is social media. Like I do YouTube. I'm really open with my Instagram. I'm open with my Twitter. I do football polls. I do so much with football, and this is what I'm getting on a regular basis. But you lot want to do a blackout? What's that going to do for me?
I don't know how this is even a bad question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What abuse do you get more, sexism or racism?
Oh God, they come at the same time, don't they?
It's about
yeah, they come at the same time. Like even when I'm live on YouTube, like you get stupid comments like live on YouTube. You are trying to do what you want to do on a YouTube platform, and a YouTube platform.
I've had that, when it's live.
The YouTube platform that I'm on, they'll accumulate like 4,000 people watching live and direct, and you will have racist people in the comments putting me down, and I'm just there like, I gotta fight through this. But what is YouTube doing to stop that? You know, I haven't seen nothing YouTube's doing. Oh, report the situation.
And that makes you annoyed, because the onus is always on you.
It's always on you.
And that's what I find frustrating about social media. That's what I want them to tackle. The onus should never be on our shoulders.
I guess that's what the blackout was about, right?
It's supposed to be, yeah. So let's end, ladies, on solutions. Solutions, Michelle. Let's start with you. Let's try and finish on what we think needs to be done and who needs to be doing it.
The issue for me with that, and I suppose I do kind of come back at those questions sometimes because of who's asking them. Because a lot of the time, a lot of the time I think black people, mixed people are exploited for their expertise and their lived experience, and actually in a way that doesn't help us. And so it's like, if you think about the oppressor and the oppressed, we as the oppressed people are having to come up and kind of solve the problem and do the work for our oppressors, which doesn't make any sense. So there's a part of me that always has a tussle with this as an activist. I mean, I'm quite old, a bit older than everybody on this panel. I was working in football clubs 20 odd years ago at the community level, and so I've seen a lot. And for me, my journey has been one where I have worked in that equality and diversity space and then turned my back on it and been really clear that actually I don't believe in that work, and I've become much more self-determinist in the work that I do in the world. So when people say to me, what's the solution, I put it back to them and say, what do you think the solution is? Because for me, I know where I have my biggest impact. I've figured out my activist style, right? I'm a natural disruptor. So I will come in and I'll sit on a panel, I'll be your diversity tick box, and I'll come in and you'll regret it, because I'll take this floor and I'll lay it out. And then I will work and support black and mixed women in the institutions that they find themselves in to navigate those spaces, to thrive, not just survive, because of the impressive environment that they're a part of. So I've found that space, and that's what I do. I rinse that out, because the work that I do in the world has to be, I can't do all of the things to be all of the solution. And I work directly with athletes as well, and some of those footballers are developing, those WSL footballers, black and mixed footballers are just developing their consciousness around these issues. And I talk to them about their activist style, figure out what it is that your offering is to this solution, and rinse that bit out. And so when people talk to me about, how do we really sort this problem out, it's doing it in a number of ways. It's doing it at the grassroots level, it's looking at recruitment and retention of black staff and mixed staff across the organisation, and it's making sure that cases of racism and intersectional oppression are identified and that they are dealt with. But above all, it's about sharing power and having a commitment to rolling up your sleeves and getting honest with the problems.
Hear it. Ladies, thank you very much for joining me today. Another important discussion, I feel anyway, about representation, or the lack of black women within women's football, both on and off the pitch. Please subscribe to our channel here on Blakademik YouTube. Check us out on our website once again, blakademik.com. All the socials, we're across Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, The Blakademik. Till next time, peace.